Rain lashed the cracked highway, washing the dust off forgotten road signs as a rusted pickup truck crept along the edge of the Nevada desert. Inside, the wipers squeaked back and forth in a tired rhythm. Behind the wheel sat Ben Harper, a man weathered by more than sun and time. His flannel shirt was stained from years of labor, his hands rough and calloused, and his eyes, though sharp, carried a weight that didn't come from age alone. At 62, Ben had outlived his wife, buried a son, and lost the ranch that had been in his family for 3 generations. Now, all he had left was a trailer he barely called home and a stubborn desire to fix something, anything, that might still be worth saving. He wasn't headed anywhere special. The detour sign had been the road suggestion, not his. But he figured maybe the storm wanted him off the main drag for a reason. Maybe it didn't. Either way, something in his gut told him to keep going until the pavement gave way to gravel and the gravel turned into mud. Ahead, movement caught his eye. A shape flailed in the downpour, tangled in barbed wire near a flooded ditch. Ben slowed the truck, squinting through the rain. It was a horse, or at least, what was left of one. A thin, wild Mustang, chestnut and white, bleeding from its flank, legs trembling from exhaustion. The barbs had snagged the animal's side, pinning it halfway under the wire, mud streaking its soaked coat. Ben killed the engine and climbed out, the rain soaking him instantly. He approached cautiously, boots squelching in the muck. The Mustang lifted its head and stared straight at him, wild-eyed and panting, but not struggling anymore. There was no fight left in it, just fear and something else. Resignation, maybe. Easy now, Ben muttered, crouching low. Ain't gonna hurt you. The horse didn't move. Blood dripped from its ribs in steady rhythm with the rain. Ben glanced down the fence line. No other ranches for miles. No tags, no brand. It was a true Mustang, untamed, unclaimed. He reached into his coat, pulled out an old utility knife, and began sawing through the lower wire. The metal whined under pressure, biting back. With a final snap, the wire gave, and the Mustang lurched sideways, collapsing into the mud with a guttural whinny. Ben caught its head gently, cradling the muzzle in his lap. The animal trembled under his hands, but didn't pull away. Up close, its breathing was shallow, labored. He could see the cuts weren't just from the wire. There were older scars under the coat, long, brutal slashes that had already scabbed over. Someone had done this. Someone had whipped this creature, maybe worse. Who did this to you? Ben whispered, brushing wet hair from its face. The horse closed its eyes, and for a moment, Ben was back on the ranch again. His son Nathan, barely 10, riding their mare Ginger in the spring fields, shouting joy into the wind. The memory hurt like a blade, sudden and deep. Ginger had been gentle. This one had never known gentle. Ben wrapped his jacket around the horse's neck, shielding it from the rain. He couldn't leave it here. Not like this. Maybe it wouldn't survive the night. But if it did, if it had that much fight left, then it deserved a chance. The drive back was slow. Ben had fashioned a makeshift sling in the truck bed, padded with spare feed sacks. The horse barely moved. He didn't even know if it was a stallion or a mare. The mud and filth made it hard to tell. All he knew was that he couldn't let it die alone. Back at his trailer, Ben hauled open the doors to the old shed he used as a workshop. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and the floor was soft with sawdust and old hay. He parked the truck and eased the horse down onto the padded ground, grunting with the strain. Once inside, the Mustang lifted its head weakly, eyes darting around the dim space. Ben lit a lantern and set it nearby, its flickering light casting long shadows. He began cleaning the wounds, hands steady despite the thunder outside. Hours passed. The bleeding slowed. The rain did not. By morning, the storm had moved on, and the horse had slept. Ben dozed in a chair nearby, a half-empty coffee mug in hand, his boots kicked off beside him. When he stirred, the horse was watching him. Alert now. Still wary, but no longer shaking. "You're tougher than you look," he said softly. "Gonna need a name if you're sticking around." The horse blinked. Its coat, beneath the dried blood and caked dirt, shimmered with a faint silver sheen in the lantern's light. Ben leaned closer. Something strange caught his eye. On the Mustang's shoulder, hidden beneath the scars and mud, was a faint indentation. Not a brand, but a mark. An old one, possibly burned or pressed into the skin long ago. It wasn't any symbol he recognized. 3 curved lines converging in a circle. Tribal? Military? Some breeder's lost lineage? A knot twisted in his gut. This horse had a story. And someone, maybe more than one someone, had tried very hard to erase it. Over the next 2 days, Ben focused on care and survival. The wounds were cleaned daily. The horse was given warm mash and water, and gradually it began to rise on shaky legs. The bond formed slowly, first through silence, then through shared stillness. The Mustang never lashed out, but it never approached either. It simply watched, observed. Ben spoke to it often, about the land he'd lost, the son he buried, the regrets that kept him up at night. The horse listened in its own way, always alert, always quiet, as if it understood more than a horse should. By the end of the week, it was walking on its own, favoring one leg slightly but growing stronger. Ben had taken to calling it Ghost, not for the coat, but for the way it moved, silent, watchful, as if it belonged to some other world. Then, just as things began to feel normal, a black SUV pulled up the long dirt road to Ben's property. He stepped outside, hand instinctively resting near the hatchet by the porch. The man who got out wasn't dressed for the desert. Black suit, clean shoes, no smile. "Can I help you?" Ben asked, shielding his eyes from the sun. The man's gaze was sharp, too sharp. "I'm looking for a horse," he said. "A Mustang. Injured. Might have wandered this way." Ben's spine straightened. Behind him, in the shed, Ghost stirred. "Don't know anything about that," Ben replied, his voice calm. His heart wasn't. The man smiled thinly. "I think you do." Ben didn't answer, but in his mind a door had opened, and behind it, danger waited. He looked back at the shed, where Ghost waited in the shadows. Something told him this wasn't over. It had only just begun. Ben watched the man in the black suit with a stillness honed by decades of hard living. The wind picked up dust from the roadside and carried it between them like a curtain. The man didn't flinch. His hair was neatly combed, face pale despite the sun, and his expression unreadable. Not local. That much was certain. His car, a sleek black SUV without plates, gleamed like oil in the heat. "I didn't catch your name," Ben said. The man stepped forward, ignoring the question. "The horse, where is it?" Ben's stance didn't change, but his voice dropped a fraction. "Like I said, don't know what you're talking about." The man's eyes narrowed. "It's important that I find it." "To who?" "You. To people who know what it's worth." Ben let the words hang in the dry air. The man didn't blink. "You a rancher?" Ben asked, tone laced with quiet suspicion. "No." "Vet? Animal control? Government? I'm just someone sent to retrieve what was lost." The man's lips barely moved. "And I'd rather do it without incident." Ben's jaw set. He didn't like the way the man said what instead of who. As if the Mustang were an object, not a living thing. Ben had seen that kind of detachment before, in bureaucrats, in cattlemen who cared more for numbers than names, and in soldiers, too, the kind who followed orders and left wreckage behind. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward the porch. "Mr. Harper," the man called. Ben froze. "I know who you are. I know about the foreclosure, your son, the accident in '03. I also know the horse you're hiding doesn't belong to you. It's marked. Unregistered, yes, but that mark is rare. And dangerous." Ben turned slowly, eyes sharp as flint. "You ever own a horse?" The man tilted his head, puzzled. "Then you wouldn't understand what it means to earn one's trust." The man exhaled, a sound just short of a laugh. "I understand more than you think." Ben stepped off the porch and walked toward the SUV, each footstep deliberate. "You come back here again, I'll assume it's not for conversation." The man didn't move. "You're making a mistake." "No, I'm fixing one." Without another word, Ben walked inside and closed the door behind him. But long after the SUV vanished into a trail of dust, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Inside the shed, Ghost stood with ears pricked, nostrils flaring. He had sensed something, a wrongness in the air. Ben moved to the lantern and turned up the flame. The Mustang's eyes reflected the light, like mirrors. "You're not just some stray, are you?" Ben murmured. He knew you. Knew your brand. Ghost didn't answer, of course, but the silence between them had a shape, a tension that hadn't been there before. Ben pulled out an old field notebook from the drawer. He sat on the overturned crate beside Ghost and flipped to the back pages. Maps, names, symbols, leftovers from a time when he'd been younger, angrier, and far more dangerous. That mark on Ghost's shoulder. He'd seen something like it before. Afghanistan. Black Ops contractors. Biological tags, used in covert breeding programs that were supposed to have been shut down. But horses? No, that didn't make sense. Still, the memory stuck like grit in his teeth. The following days passed in uneasy rhythm. Ben kept Ghost out of sight, working late into the nights, reinforcing the old paddock, clearing a space in the backwoods where the Mustang could stretch without being seen. But every engine in the distance made his pulse quicken. He started sleeping with a shotgun beside the bed. Paranoia, maybe, but he'd lived long enough to know not to ignore instinct. Ghost healed quickly. The cuts closed, the limp eased, and with each passing day, his spirit returned in flickers. He'd test Ben, pulling back when approached, bolting at sudden movement, but he also followed at a distance now, eyes always locked on Ben's back. Watching, waiting. Trust was growing, but so was the danger. One evening, as a blood-orange sun dipped behind the hills, Ben sat on the porch with a worn harmonica in hand. The notes he played were simple, slow. Songs his father used to hum during storms. Behind the shed, he could hear Ghost pacing, soft hooves against dry soil. Then came the sound of tires on gravel. Not from the road, but from the ridge. The back entrance. Ben stood instantly, harmonica falling silent. He moved to the edge of the porch, eyes scanning the hills. A second vehicle. Different from the first. Military style. No headlights. Moving quiet. Ben ducked inside, grabbed his coat and the shotgun, then slipped out the side door. He didn't go for the Mustang immediately. He went to the tree line, crouching low behind a cluster of juniper. Two men emerged from the vehicle, both dressed in plain desert camo. Not army. Not ranch hands, either. Private. Their movements were disciplined, surgical. One carried a tranquilizer rifle. Ben's stomach turned. They moved toward the shed. He circled behind them, stepping silently through brush and gravel. The sky dimmed further, casting everything in shadow. "Area's clear," one of the men said. "No cameras. He's keeping it here." Ben stepped out of the dark, with the shotgun raised. "You're on private land." Both men froze. "Turn around." Slowly. They obeyed, hands half raised. One of them, taller, leaner, spoke first. "Mr. Harper, no need for drama. We're just here for the animal." "It has a name," Ben snapped. "And it's not going anywhere." "Sir, you don't understand." "I understand enough. You're interfering with a classified retrieval." "I'm protecting a wounded soul," Ben said, voice tight. "There's a difference." The man's fingers twitched near his belt. Ben's eyes caught the motion. His grip tightened. Then Ghost screamed, a sharp, wild cry from the shadows behind the shed. In that second of distraction, the lean man lunged. Ben fired. The blast cracked through the stillness like a thunderclap. One man dropped, clutching his shoulder, blood pouring between his fingers. The other fled toward the truck, diving inside as Ghost galloped from the trees in a blur of motion, hooves striking sparks on rock. Ben didn't chase. He knelt beside the wounded man, disarmed him, then dragged him toward the porch and bound his wrists with baling twine. "You tell your people," Ben growled. "If they want Ghost, they better be ready for a war." As the night swallowed the land whole, Ben turned toward the shed, where Ghost stood proud and fierce beneath the stars, his coat glowing silver like a creature from some forgotten legend. Ben had made his choice, and there was no going back. The storm rolled in before dawn. Thunder groaned over the hills, dragging heavy rain across the roof like the sound of boots on gravel. Ben stood at the window, silhouetted by flickering lightning, watching the edge of the treeline where Ghost had vanished hours earlier. He hadn't returned. The man Ben had wounded was gone now, hauled off in a truck before sunrise by someone who didn't knock, didn't ask. No words were exchanged. Just a sharp look from a driver in mirrored glasses, and a warning etched into silence. The message was clear: we're not done. Ben hadn't slept. He couldn't. Not knowing Ghost was still out there. Not knowing who might find him first. He pulled on his coat and stepped into the wet morning, the air sharp with the scent of pine and ozone. The paddock was empty. No hoof prints in the mud. No distant whinnies. Ghost had vanished without a sound. Ben saddled his old quarter horse, Toby, and rode into the hills. He didn't call out. He knew Ghost wouldn't respond to shouting. But he listened, looked for movement in the shadows. Branches bent the wrong way. Grass pressed down. The faintest prints on damp earth. Hours passed. It was near midday when he found blood on a rock ledge, just a smear. Old maybe. But near it, scattered hair. White. Ben dismounted and knelt. The wind stilled. Birds quieted. Then, faint and almost buried beneath the hush of rain, he heard it. A low snort. He moved carefully, climbing the incline, hands braced on cold stone. On the other side, nestled in a bowl of high brush and fallen trees, Ghost stood motionless. Mud streaked his flanks. A gash opened near his hind leg, not deep, but raw. His chest heaved, and his head whipped up at the sound of a snapped twig. Ben froze. Ghost didn't run. Instead, his ears flicked, assessing. Ben stayed low and began speaking, quietly, steadily, like a man coaxing a memory back from darkness. You found your way up here. Smart. No tracks, no trails. You knew they'd follow. Ghost's tail flicked. You're hurt, but you stood your ground. That's something. A pause. Then softly he said, I need you to come with me now. Can't protect you if you stay out here. Ghost didn't move. Ben reached into his coat and pulled out a rope, not to use, but to show. Then he dropped it at his feet and stepped back. The gesture wasn't lost on the Mustang. His head dipped slightly, nostrils flaring. He took a single step forward, and then another. By the time they reached the barn, the rain had lightened, but something in Ben's chest felt heavier. The incident had changed everything. Ghost wasn't just a wounded stray anymore. He was a target. Hunted. Ben cleaned the wound in silence. Ghost didn't resist. When it was done, Ben stood for a long while, one hand on the Mustang's side, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. That night, he went to his old shed, dug through a rusted chest, and pulled out a box he'd hoped never to touch again. Inside were papers, some yellow with age, others recent, maps, surveillance photos, reports. Evidence from a time he tried to bury. He spread them across the table and began to piece it together. The mark on Ghost's shoulder wasn't just military. It was biotech, a closed program buried deep in the defense archives. Ben had once worked peripherally on rural security, animal tracking, wildlife response for military bases. He'd heard rumors then of attempts to enhance natural instinct. Horses bred for resilience, speed, intelligence, silent mobility, war mounts without fear. But the funding had dried up. The projects had vanished. Or so they'd said. He flipped through until he found it. A blurry photo of a young Mustang. Same white blaze down the face. Same eyes. Ghost had been bred for war. But he hadn't stayed. Ben leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. What did it mean? That Ghost escaped? That someone let him go? Or worse, was he bait? No answer came. 2 nights later, headlights returned. This time, they didn't sneak. 3 vehicles pulled up, blocking the drive. Men in black uniforms stepped out with precision. One of them carried a sealed metal case. Another had a collar. Not leather. Tech, heavy with wiring. Ben stood on the porch, shotgun in hand, but he didn't raise it. The man in the black suit emerged last. Same one. Still immaculate. We gave you time, he said. Ben didn't reply. You've interfered with federal retrieval. I've given shelter to an injured animal. He's not an animal. Not anymore. The words cut deep. And that's when Ben understood. They didn't see Ghost as broken. They saw him as failed property. I've seen what you do with those you claim, Ben said. How many have you tested? How many didn't make it? That's not your concern. It is now. The man stepped forward. Mr. Harper, you're old, tired, Alone. This ends two ways. You can hand over the horse and walk away. Ben didn't move. Or we take him. And you won't walk away at all. A long silence followed. Then, behind the barn, a whinny rang out. Ghost stepped into view. Head high. Wounded leg stiff, but firm. He walked with defiance in every step. Toward Ben. The man in the suit raised his hand. One of the others moved to circle around. Ben didn't lift the shotgun. He didn't have to, because Ghost broke into a gallop. Not toward the men, but toward the woods. 3 men followed instantly. The one with the case stumbled. The one with the collar ran fastest. Ben fired once, not at them, but at the ground. Dirt kicked up in a warning blast. Back off. Ghost vanished into the trees. Panic erupted. Shouts, scrambling. One man raised a dart gun. Ben aimed straight at him. You fire that. You die where you stand. It wasn't a threat. It was fact. The man froze. The man in the suit lowered his hand. You'll regret this. Ben stepped down from the porch. Maybe. But not tonight. They left. Slowly. Reluctantly. But they left. Ben stood there long after the engines disappeared. In the distance, the thunder had stopped. But a new storm was coming. The morning after the standoff, Ben found a note pinned to his barn door. No signature. Just 6 words, printed in red ink. He will be reclaimed. One way. Ben burned the note in his wood stove without hesitation, but its heat didn't reach the cold crawling under his skin. They weren't bluffing. These men, whatever government shadows they claimed allegiance to, had marked Ghost. And men like that didn't forget. They waited. They wore you down. They made you disappear when no one was looking. Ben knew because he'd once helped them do it. Back in the Army, long before his discharge, he'd written reports, made assessments, watched good animals broken under the guise of national defense. Most hadn't survived. Ghost had, but not without cost. For the next 2 days, Ben kept the property on high alert. He laid trip wires through the backwoods, nothing lethal, just noisemakers. Oldkins filled with nails, taut fishing line across game trails. He rotated night watches, with Toby tethered close. Ghost stayed mostly in the barn, his gash slowly healing, but his ears never rested. He knew danger was circling. The second night, Ben noticed something different. Ghost was standing beside the tack room, staring at the workbench. Not pacing, not nervous, focused. Ben followed his gaze. On the bench lay an old leather satchel, sealed shut, covered in dust. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside were the remnants of a past life. His old field maps, a compass, a weathered service knife, and a small pouch of tokens. Items once important enough to keep but painful to remember. Ghost took a step forward, brushed the satchel with his nose. You want to leave? Ben asked, voice low. Ghost didn't move. Just kept staring. Ben opened the satchel and placed the map on the bench, flattening it with his palm. The folds were still sharp. The ink slightly faded. The lines traced an escape route he'd once planned for himself, a way out of everything. It ended near the Canadian border, at a ranch owned by a widow named Ruth McCaffrey. She owed him a favor, big enough to hide a horse, maybe even 2. Ben exhaled slowly. We run, they follow. You know that. Ghost blinked once. Calm. Waiting. That night, Ben didn't sleep. He packed instead. Just the essentials. Blankets, dried food, spare ammo, and enough pain medication to keep Ghost mobile. He scribbled a note and nailed it to the inside of the barn door. If I don't return, let the land breathe. It's done all it can. They left at first light. Ghost refused to be led. He followed on his own, unhaltered, alert but obedient, eyes scanning the trees like a soldier on patrol. Toby bore most of the supplies, steady and sure. Ben led the way, weaving through gullies and switchbacks only he knew, places off any GPS, long erased from county maps. By the second day, the tension in Ben's shoulders began to ease. No drones overhead, no tire tracks, no snapping twigs that didn't belong. Maybe they'd bought themselves time. That night, they camped near a shallow stream. Ghost drank deeply, lifting his head only when the wind changed. Ben sat on a log, map open on his knee, firelight dancing across the edges. "You've been hunted before," he said. Ghost stood on the other side of the flames, the wind rifling his mane. Ben looked down. "I was wrong to think I could hide you." He remembered the mission logs, the reports of escapees, animals that slipped through testing phases. They weren't just tracked. They were terminated. Quietly. Cleanly. But Ghost had lived. Somehow. And now he was standing by a fire, as if listening, as if understanding every word. The third day brought trouble. It came in the form of silence, too perfect, too absolute. No birds. No squirrels. The forest held its breath. Ben raised a hand, and both horses froze. Then he heard it, the faint hum of a drone. Not overhead, somewhere to the east. Scanning. Ben pulled the thermal blanket from his pack and threw it over Ghost's back. The material crinkled slightly, but the Mustang didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still while Ben guided him into the shadows beneath a rock ledge. Toby followed, grumbling a little but compliant. The drone passed. Ben waited another 10 minutes before moving again. They took a harder trail, doubling back briefly, then circling northwest. Every detour cost them hours, but speed wasn't the goal now, stealth was. That night, Ben didn't light a fire. He huddled between the horses, wrapped in a tarp, eyes always scanning the stars above for movement. He dreamed of sand, of endless desert nights, and the sound of hooves on cracked earth, of horses built to run across battlefields where no man survived. He woke sweating. By the fourth day, Ghost's limp had returned. Ben slowed their pace, letting the Mustang set the rhythm. He checked the wound again. No infection, but the muscle was strained. Pushed too hard. He'd need rest. Real rest. By dusk, they reached the ridge. Below, nestled in a narrow valley, lay Ruth's ranch. It looked the same, weather-beaten fence line, corrugated roof, windmill turning lazy circles in the breeze. Smoke curled from the chimney. Ben felt a knot loosen in his chest. He turned to Ghost. Almost there. But Ghost wasn't looking at the ranch. He was staring behind them. Ben turned slowly. On the far ridge, backlit by the sinking sun, stood 3 men. Uniformed. Armed. Ben didn't hesitate. He mounted Toby in one swift motion and whistled once, sharp, clear. Ghost wheeled and ran. They thundered down the slope, hooves striking dirt and rock, the valley opening like a mouth ahead. A shot cracked behind them, missed. Another. A tree splintered. Ben didn't look back. They cleared the bottom, crossed a shallow stream, and raced toward the barn. The door flung open. Ruth stood there, shotgun in hand. "Ben Harper," she barked. "You better have a damn good reason for leading hell to my doorstep." "Just need time." Ben shouted, hauling Toby inside. Ghost barreled in behind him. Ruth slammed the door and slid the bolt. "How long?" "Maybe minutes." She nodded once. "Then you better show me where you want them buried." And for the first time in days, Ben smiled.